Welcome back. This is IB Psychology. The section is Abnormal Psychology, and we're looking at Learning Outcome 5.8, evaluating the use of biomedical, individual, and group approaches to treatment. Much like 5.7, in which we were examining the same thing, today we're evaluating these uses. Are they effective? Can we see other alternatives? Why are they effective? At the top of your study guide, there's a little blurb that every one of you should read and take to heart. That drugs are nearly always a part of treatment for severe depression, even moderate depression. You'll find that probably in a drug-related survey, you'll find that medication is often given. And think of it this way. It's so much easier, okay, if you think about it, to treat with medication than it is to take the time out to go to therapy. When I was going to when I continue to go to therapy for my knee, I have to leave school by a certain time. I have to fight the traffic back up here to my neighborhood, go to my physical therapist, and then get in to be seen. Take an hour out of my day to go through all of that, and then go on home. It's not just 1 hour of therapy. It's 1 hour plus the additional time beforehand, the additional time afterwards, that really throws a person's day into a monkey wrench. And so a lot of people are going to sit there and say, you know what, I don't want to necessarily go to therapy. Just give me the medication. I'll go this alone. And so medication seems to be, especially in our society, our culture, seems to be this panacea for the cure-all drug. And so pharmaceutical companies love this, to be very honest with you. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Just take the number of people that are suffering from depression here in the United States, excuse me, and you'll discover that you have an industry that will feed into that. Not just people that are chronic depressants, I think that's the term, but people that suffer from 1, 2 episodes of depression, bipolar, things of this nature. This is increasing, and medications provided by pharmaceutical companies such as McNeil, Lilly, there are many, many others out there. These are just two companies that come to mind as I'm sitting here. It's in a multi-billion-dollar industry, and to get these lucrative markets in such areas as major urban settings, New York, Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Washington, D.C. This area is a town for depressed people, okay? And people that have health insurance, and these health insurance companies are paying the bucks. This medication is not cheap. Okay, let's go back to the Neil study that we mentioned in 5.7 that talks about antidepressants versus the placebo effect. And so, as a result of this, there is a strong, strong wave of argument against the use of this much medication, whether it's the cure-all for depression itself. There is no argument that it does have a tendency to abate depressive symptoms in most people. And so the medication continues. The FDA, Food and Drug Administration, has said, that we can understand that the studies like the Neil study and others like it, have a tendency to show us that this may not be the end all, the be all for depression. But we can't argue with the fact that many people are actually effectively being treated with medication. So let's move on. We're going to evaluate biomedical treatment in depression, and here we have a different study, the Lucher study et al. 2002. Here they examined the brain function of 51 people, not a huge group of people, 51, okay, not a huge group of people, but nevertheless a group of people that's an effective group to look at. with depression who received either a placebo or an active medication, probably the SSRI. An EEG, electroencephalograph, that machine that is hooked up to the outside of the brain, measure brain waves, was used to compare brain function. Designed as a double-blind study over 9 weeks, the study measured 2 different SSRI medications. SSRI medications probably come close to a dozen or so different ones. I want to say Zoloft. I could be wrong. Is one brand name. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on it, okay? The prefrontal cortex, remember that area up by your eyebrows, showed significant increase in activity in placebo, but different in SSRIs, and both groups, oddly enough, got better. Indication is that the brain may be able to heal itself and the power of positive cognitive thinking. Let's go back to mindfulness psychology. It plays a role here, a very positive role. They don't come out and talk about it in this particular study. They allude to it. And so the next study to look at is the Kirsch study in 2008. This was a meta-analysis, looked at clinical trials. If I have not spoken about it already, if you've not heard it, is where a drug company goes out and actually treats people, and they ask people to come in and participate in these trials. You're part of an experimental group. Okay, you may either be receiving the medication or you may be receiving a placebo. You never know. And so you have to have certain symptoms in order to participate in this trial. You have to be of a certain age group, certain physical fitness, other criteria they need, and they get these people involved in these clinical trials. And this is what they take the data they take to the Food and Drug Administration and say, look, this is what we were able to show. So they examined clinical trials of 6 most used SSRIs between the years 87 and 99. The results showed that the overall effect of new generation SSRIs was below the recommended criteria. This indicates that placebo may be just as effective as SSRIs. Okay, meds seem to have the highest effect on most severe cases of depression. So, what this Kirsch study is saying from their analysis of these trials is the stronger, the more severe the depression, the more the SSRIs appear to be working as an effective drug. But moderate amounts of depression seem to respond just as well to placebo, or if you think about it, positive psychology, and as the medication. And so how many people out of a given population that suffer from depression suffer from the most extreme form? And we're going to discover that it's a smaller percentage even yet. Most people probably right smack dab in the middle. All right, moving on. I'm sorry, this looks a little different. Well, on my screen it looks a little different. You have the title up here, Evaluation of the Individual Approaches to Treatment of Depression. And here we're looking at the Luty study, the Luty, L-U-T-Y, et al., 2007. I hope this comes out differently. But you can look on your study guide. The study looked at the relative effectiveness of 2 treatments for major depression. There was a 16-week therapy with 8 to 29 individuals per session. And I remember they may have started off with a much larger group. Go back to your individual studies that you were doing for your IAs. How many of you started off with a select group of 30 kids and ended up dropping for whatever reason 1 or 2? So they started out with therapies with 8 to 29 individuals per session. Patients were randomly allocated to either a CBT group or an IPT group. No medication was administered, and those who did use medication were excluded from this study. Simply put, let's see if it's on the next page. Hold on. Simply put, only 20% of patients with severe depression responded to IP, whereas 57% of patients responded to CBT. So again, CBT ends up being the better indicator for this particular study. The results indicate that psychotherapy alone could relieve symptoms of depression even when no drug is given. you're going to find that most people are probably going to take a combination. And most psychiatrists are going to say, let's do a combination of medications and then get you off the drugs altogether. Last study to look at here is the Elkin study of '89. This was a controlled outcome study of treatment of depression, and it involved 280 patients with diagnosis of major depression and were randomly assigned to either antidepressants, a placebo, CBT, and an IBT. Before we go into the results, this was a really good study as far as what it was looking at. Even though 280 patients is a good selection, that's probably the best they could get at the moment. They were able to allocate those among 4 different groups. It ran for 16 weeks, good amount of time, and were assessed at the start, at 6 weeks, and 18 months interval. This is good. This is good. Good follow-up too. The study showed a reduction of depression symptoms of 50% in therapy and drug groups, and only 29% in placebo. Okay, so let me see. Let me just check my notes here. Yeah. So there was a 50% reduction in therapy groups in the drug group, 29% in the placebo group, but there was no difference in the effectiveness of CBT and IPT or antidepressant treatments. This indicates that psychotherapy might be an alternative in some cases. The recovery rate for therapy, the psychological and the drugs together, is only 50% in this study, so neither of the treatments can be guaranteed recovery for all patients. Right? And the last one we're going to look at here is evaluation of group approaches to treatment of depression. And the only study we have here of merit is the McDermott study of 2001. This was a meta-analysis on the effectiveness of group therapy for depression, based on 48 cases between 1970 and 1998, good spread of years. The mean age was 44, and 78% were women. All but one study included cognitive and behavioral treatment groups. All but one, okay? The results showed that 45 of the 48 studies reported the group psychotherapy was effective for reducing depressive symptoms. Overall results showed that the group therapy was more effective than no treatment whatsoever. Yeah, that's very true. Raise this up here. Conclusion was that there is sound empirical support that group therapy is effective for relieving depression symptoms. So going back to this idea that most psychologists, psychiatrists in practice are probably going to put you on some form of medication and probably get you into some form of therapy. If you can afford it, individual therapy. If you cannot, group therapy. And group therapy in conjunction with medication and getting you off medication as soon as practical to control your symptoms is probably the most effective way of doing it. And if you look at all this all together, then mindfulness therapy probably is the most effective overall, conjunction with group therapy. Okay, that is this 5.8 in a nutshell. All right, thanks.